Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon, everyone. You are listening to, you are watching, you are witnessing humanity in the headlines. I am your host, Atiba Buchanan. Joining me as always is Mr. David Seaton. How are you, my brother?
I am doing well. Once again, I have to give a shout out to Earl Winfrey and that smooth jazz intro.
Yes.
I've got to go ahead and download your entire
catalog, right?
Throw it in the cloud.
I do want to, let's take a minute to give a couple shouts out. First of all, we got the Proviso West all-class picnic tomorrow. I'm going to give them a free commercial. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make it because I'll be at my daughter's first fashion show. She's modeling, so I'm excited about that. But if you haven't gotten tickets for the Proviso West all-class picnic, if you've graduated from West, you had to have graduated. Then it's not too late to get your tickets. The picnic is tomorrow, so get out there and reconnect and enjoy fellowship, all that good stuff.
Shout out to your daughter doing her first fashion show tomorrow.
Absolutely. I'm excited about that. That's a natural hair show. It's going to be at the Congress Hotel. She's been practicing for about 10 weeks in preparation.
Wow.
And I'm very, very proud of her. Very, very proud of her. Very excited about it. The same gentleman, Mr. Mark Carter, trained my wife and I 20 years ago.
Okay.
When we were trying to model, and definitely it was more my wife than me, but I did one show with him. I'm still in the business 20 years later of doing that and being able to train our child and make it full circle. So, and little tidbit, and Lita was actually pregnant with Niani, the first fashion show we did with him. So, yeah. So anyway, about that. Any other shouts out? I think that's it. I want to do the all class picnic and let everybody know that that's going on.
Where is that going to be held?
I forgot.
Okay.
And if you're on Facebook, you can get in touch with Anisha Smith. You can contact my wife. She has information on it as well if you're friends with Lita Buchanan. So, but the picnic is tomorrow. If you were not aware, all classes, does not matter what year you graduated. So feel free to show up in fellowship. Now, moving on, Dave, we have a lot to do. Again, time is always against us. It's just me and you today, which is great. We have a lot to talk about. Let's see. We would like to thank our Facebook Live people for joining us. We'd like to thank our Intellectual Radio people for listening today, and our iHeartRadio fans for listening. Whatever medium you're using to listen, we thank you. And as always, we thank Mr. Breon Jones for putting together an excellent show. So I am exhausted from trying to keep up with these Trump people this week.
Donald Trump Jr.
The gift that keeps on giving.
Oh, man.
He is literally the gift that keeps on giving.
The word for today is nepotism.
Yeah, that's the word. And this is why we don't condone it, because these are the things that you're susceptible to. When I got a chance to kind of think about the gravity of the potential of things that could have happened because of this meeting. So let's start from the beginning. As always, let's give our listeners the facts. Do you want to give them the synopsis of really what just happened this past week, what was revealed through the New York Times and through Donald Trump Jr. himself?
I had the opportunity to watch this in real time this week. So first, it was disclosed that Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, who was one of the original campaign managers for the Trump campaign, along with Jared Kushner, who is Donald Trump's son-in-law, who is married to Ivanka Trump. The three of them had a previously undisclosed meeting in Trump Tower back in June. I believe it was
June.
It was in June.
June 7th, I want to say.
Yeah, I was trying to remember the date. So they had this previously undisclosed meeting. Now, the reason why this is important, why we're drawing the point about it being undisclosed, is because Jared Kushner, as a member of the Trump campaign, had to fill out a document disclosing any contacts that he had with any foreign agents.
Right. As a member of the campaign and now a member of the administration.
Correct. He was a member of the campaign, member of the transition team, and now a member of the administration. So them had a meeting with this Russian lawyer, and the meeting was set up, without getting too deep, the meeting was set up by some acquaintances and business partners in Russia with the Trump family. And they sent a specific email that said, hey, the Russian government interesting information about Hillary Clinton. Juicy stuff. We'd love to get this information to you. And Donald Trump Jr. responds and says, I love it.
Yes.
Especially if we can get this information out later in the summer. So originally Donald Trump Jr. says, oh, it was just the three of us and this Russian lawyer. And she said she had some information, but it turns out all she wanted to do was talk about adoption. So nothing to see here. Then it comes out, actually disclosed the actual emails that said that the pretext for the meeting was giving opposition research on Hillary Clinton.
And this was only
24 hours later.
Right. But it was only exposed by Donald Trump Jr. because the New York Times was about to release it themselves.
Exactly.
Right. So it wasn't a matter of him being transparent.
Not at all.
It was about him being busted.
So first he comes out and says, oh, we had this meeting, no big deal. Then he comes out and says, oh, all we were talking about was adoption. Then he comes out, like you just said, because the New York Times was about to disclose the contents of this email. It says, well, yeah, they said they were going to give us some opposition research on Hillary Clinton, but they didn't. All they wanted to do was talk about adoption. Then the president comes out and endorses the story and says, hey, they had this meeting. They didn't get any information. No big deal. That was as of Wednesday. In the last 24 to 48 hours, we have found out that there were additional people who were at the meeting. They weren't disclosed. They disclosed one of them, which is an American citizen who has some background working in Russia or working in Russian intelligence. But there's possibly a second or a third person who has yet to be disclosed. And
there was a translator there.
And there was a translator there, right? Because the woman again, I can't remember her name, but the Russian lawyer, Valenistrava, I think is how you say her name, something like that. But she doesn't speak English. Have a translator there, but that was one of the sticking points when this story first broke, was that you had a meeting with a Russian lawyer who needed a translator.
Right. So here's the other things that they omitted, and the things that they are begging us to believe to be true, which is beyond any reasonable thought. Donald Trump Jr. also indicated that she was some lawyer, but he didn't know who she was.
Right.
And at the time that he took this meeting, that Donald Trump was then candidate Trump,
right,
who had secured the Republican nomination.
Right.
He was the Republican nominee for president, which meant that he was now receiving full-time Secret Service protection.
Right.
Which means you cannot book a meeting in Trump Tower at his headquarters without going through the Secret Service.
Right.
So you cannot be a nameless person and book a meeting through the Secret Service.
Right.
So that cannot be true.
Right.
For them not to know who she was. So they're trying to diminish again their relationship and their understanding with this woman. The other thing they indicate that Donald Trump Jr. left out was, again, just the whole tenet of the meeting. They've changed that 2 to 3 to 4 times now. And I am just disgusted with the fact that there are so many people pointing to his naivete as the defense.
Right.
And that's what blows my mind. When I listen to this story, I'm immediately taken back to Kathy Griffin is her name, the comedian,
right,
that had the Donald Trump head.
Right.
This is what frustrates me about Republicans and Democrats. Republicans, no matter what, as you would say, on principle, are going to defend whatever needs to be defended. They have a complete inability to say,
right,
when one of their own does something. I think about all the when Kathy Griffin had the Donald Trump head,
right,
there weren't any dissenting Democratic voices defending her.
Right.
Everyone in agreement, lockstep, said she's wrong, and whatever consequences she suffered, which was being fired by CNN, no one came to her defense.
Correct.
Because Democrats have an ability to say when something is wrong or foul.
Right.
And here we're looking at something that is clear as day. We still have we've seen Republicans go from there was no collusion, how dare you ask,
right,
to well, there was a meeting, to well, there was collusion, but that's not illegal.
Right. Exactly.
And Tucker Carlson has already taken himself to the position of almost saying it's okay to collude with Russia. Why shouldn't we? Anyone would have done it. And to watch this transformation happen and this abandonment of any of their morals just because their candidate is in the White House is absolutely disgusting.
As a parent, I know you're a parent.
Yep.
I am a parent. Anybody who's listening, who out there who's a parent, if your child comes to you and they have to add to their story 2 and 3 times, at some point you're going to say enough is enough, because Donald Trump came out at first and said, Donald Trump Jr. came out and said, oh yeah, we had this meeting, but it was no big deal. Really, I'm telling the truth.
Right.
Then it said, oh yeah, wait. Yeah, we had this meeting, but we were just discussing adoption. Really? Believe me. Oh yeah. Wait, we weren't. They said they were going to give us some Oppo research on Hillary Clinton, but they didn't give it to us. So no big deal. Believe me, it was just us in the meeting. Oh yeah, there were some other people in the meeting. Now I'm telling the truth.
Yes.
So I said all of that to say that it is impossible that they had this 30-minute meeting, and that it is impossible for us to believe Donald Trump Jr.'s account of what transpired in that meeting, because he's lied the entire time.
He's lost all credibility.
And here's another interesting clip for those of you who are paying attention that go back to the actual campaign. Remember a little meeting on the tarmac? Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton.
Yes, sir.
And Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch said, hey, we had this 30-minute meeting on the tarmac. We talked about our kids and we talked about golf, and that was it. Right in the middle of the time where Hillary Clinton's emails were under the microscope, Donald Trump did a brilliant job of dissembling that excuse, saying, hey, golf. But once I talk about golf for like a minute or two, I'm done. He's like, I went back and looked at the actual video. He said, I love my grandkids. I love them, all 3 of them. But once I talk about my grandkids for about a minute or two, I'm done. So they had another 25, 26 minutes to have this conversation. And you don't think they were talking about Hillary Clinton's emails? Give me a break. So he did a brilliant job of dissembling what could have been a very honest account of what transpired, that they met on the tarmac, had a 30-minute conversation. Loretta Lynch is the attorney general. Bad judgment for her to have a conversation with the candidate's ex-husband, or with the candidate's husband. However, that's an ex-president.
Yeah, exactly.
If Barack Obama called me up right now, I'd have to say, excuse me, humanity in the headlines, I have to take an important phone call.
Right.
I'll be right back. So, again, amazes me. And that's what this whole thing is with the Trump family. It's karma. Everything that they've attacked Hillary Clinton on, they are 10 times as guilty of the exact same offense. But Bill Clinton has a 30-minute meeting with Loretta Lynch on the tarmac. Donald Trump says that's ridiculous. They had to have been discussing something nefarious. Donald Trump Jr. has a 30-minute conversation with an admitted agent of the Russian government, because that came out in the last 48 hours too, that she admitted that she was operating under the auspices of the Russian government. They have a 30-minute conversation. Nothing of it. And here's the other thing that nobody's paying attention to. They kind of covered it when it first broke. The Bitsinski Act was a law that was passed we sanctioned,
right?
We sanctioned, the United States sanctioned specific people in Russia who were guilty of human rights abuses. So there were specific individuals who we were disallowing them to participate in international banking and so forth. And these are very high-level rich people within the Russian oligarchy. The Russian Vladimir Putin's response to that was to stop allowing U.S. people or United States citizens to adopt Russian children and Russian orphans. So think about that. Their original story was that this Russian lawyer was meeting with Donald Trump Jr. to discuss Russian adoptions by United States citizens. The United States can't do anything about that. Whether the United States would have any power in affecting Vladimir Putin disallowing United States citizens to adopt Russian children and orphans is to lift the sanctions
Right.
on those Russian
Which is
oligarchs.
so what you're saying is basically that they're telling on themselves,
Right.
even if his story is true,
Right.
that they were discussing adoption, that's still an issue because he wasn't President Trump.
Exactly.
He was the candidate for president, and here they are still discussing prematurely
Right.
removing sanctions.
Right.
And in an environment that no one is keeping record of this.
Right.
Private setting.
Right.
So again, even if the best case scenario of him telling the truth, it's still a conflict of interest and it's still a problem.
And Donald Trump, here's the biggest part of the story. People have been alluding to it, and the Trump administration, again, they have done a brilliant job of deflecting and denying. But within 24 hours of Donald Trump Jr. having this conversation with this Russian lawyer, Donald Trump then goes out on the campaign trail and announces within a week, we're going to have this treasure trove of information about the Clintons. We're going to be able to tell you everything about them.
That was the same day. Like the same day of the next
24
day.
hours.
No,
Yes.
Right. So again, it is amazing. And then the other inconsistency is that they indicated that Donald Trump knew nothing about this meeting until the other day.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
It is an impossible coincidence that Donald Trump Jr. gets an email saying we got all this opposition research on Hillary Clinton on Monday, and then Tuesday Donald Trump goes out and announces, hey, going to have this huge disclosure on Hillary Clinton no later than Monday.
And it's also impossible that Donald Trump Jr., the son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who's in the administration, and the then campaign manager, Paul Manafort, would take a meeting and Donald Trump not know about it in Trump Tower.
It's impossible. Just think about, again, when you think about how Donald Trump just always talks about, he gives his family the closeness and the intimacy of his family such effusive praise that we're so close and we're so this and we're so that. And just knowing the braggart, the boorish person that Donald Trump Sr. is, it is impossible that his campaign manager, his son, and his son-in-law did not run to him immediately and say, huge information that we just got in this email, but you can't say anything. You can't tweet about it. You can't say anything, but I think we got her.
Right.
Our Russian friends are going to give us this information. I think we got her.
Well, it makes for great conversation. It actually would probably make for a great mini-series. But we do have some more serious things happening in the background now. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about our Republican friends on the Hill who are trying to pass health care again, this time through the Senate. So once again, they are trying to pass this bill in secret. Once again, we're not going to have hearings, bipartisan criticism of the bill, bipartisan support, bipartisan evaluation of the bill. That's not going to happen because we're not going to have hearings. We do know that in contrast that there were hundreds of hearings for Obamacare. Once again, the president is nowhere to be found in this process other than to offer these weird tweets, but he's not making a full-throated endorsement of the Republican health care plan.
Well, he was on the Christian Broadcast Network the other day, and he said, when asked about his participation in passing the Republican repeal of the Affordable Care Act, he said, I'm sitting in the office at my desk, pen in hand, ready to sign it.
Of his involvement. So once again, and here's a new twist. This time, the Republicans have determined that they will not present the new plan to the CBO for a score. At this point, they're saying they don't trust the CBO.
Right, of course.
That's the Congressional Budget Office for all, if you're not one of these policy wonks. And that is a bipartisan group that evaluates this legislature and gives us the best case scenarios of how it's going to impact people and how it's going to impact the economy. And they've had horrible scores in the past for what, 2 or 3 times now. This is try number 4.
The House bill was predicted to kick 23. The
24 started 24.
Right, it was 24. I remember there was a million difference between the House bill and the original Senate bill.
Right. It went from 24 to 23 to 22.
Okay.
Second time that the Senate tried to bring this up, it would be 22 million people off of insurance, 17 million of which would be white. So we've seen now people protesting the Hill. We've seen it, and we've seen these town hall meetings where these senators are really getting the business from their constituents, as they should be. And once again, we are to a point where we are literally considering tax breaks for the rich over the health and well-being of American citizens. And I just want to say up front that I think it's absolutely disgusting. And the fact that they're doing it in secret, shame on them. And here's another tidbit I learned this week. Of course, there's a provision in it for them to be exempt.
Exactly.
Them being the congressmen and senators.
Here's a question. Let me play devil's advocate. On Facebook Live, we appreciate you listening, and you have the ability to interact in real time. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post those, and we'll get to those. But here, let me play devil's advocate. Why should my tax money, hard-earned tax dollars that I go to work and sweat for every day, why should I let the government take my money to take care of someone else?
That's what they ask, right?
Right.
So let's answer that. And I hate to steal your answer, but it's such a brilliant answer. For those that have never heard it, it's the absolute truth. Because the benefit of,
thank you, by the way.
Oh, you're welcome. The benefit of one person benefits everyone. What we mean by that is, as you had so eloquently stated, if people don't have health insurance and they get a disease that they can pass along to someone else, and they can't go get that taken care of, something that we 99% of the time have a cure for,
right?
but they can't go to the hospital to get that taken care of. And it's something that you can contract, and they're on the bus with you, they're on the train with you, they're at the Bulls game with you. Go ahead and sneeze, and now 100 other people have it. Because we didn't think enough of the investment in our system to help people stay healthy. So it is worth it, like you say, from a very selfish point of view, for your own health, to make sure, for your children's health,
right,
to make sure that people are able to access health care and doctors so that they can take care of things that they don't have to go to the emergency room to take care of. And that's just one way to look at it. That's another way to look at it is through national security. Terrorist decides to attack us in a way that through some type of biometric measure that hurts people,
right?
And then they can't go to the doctor to get it taken care of because we don't have single payer, or we just decide again to go back to something that kicks people off of health care.
Right.
So again, it makes sense for your own health to allow people to get to the hospital to be healthy, let alone it being the most humane thing to do.
I would even take it a step further, and I'm sure you and I privately had this conversation, but I would even take it a step further, and we'd love to hear your comments. And you can also call us live at
38953. I got it.
Right. You can give us a call, and we're taking those calls live today. When you look at the countries, when you look at the European countries or the Asian countries that have universal health care, even if you look at Canada right to the north of us, when you look at the majority of those countries, overwhelmingly they are racially homogenous. If you look at the Scandinavian countries, Norway and Sweden and the Netherlands, those countries are 95% the same race, or they're 95% white, or they're 95% all of the same racial demographic. And I think it's easier when they think of the group to which they belong. I think it's easier for them to part with their money when they know that they're helping someone that looks like them, or they're helping someone else who's in this country. The Republicans have done an excellent job of separating us into, so the average person feels like you're taking my money and giving it to those people. Whether it's Arabs, whether it's Latinos, whether it's African Americans, whether it's poor people, the narrative is always set up that they're taking something from you and giving it to those people over there, and you don't even care about those people over there. So why would you want somebody to take your money? People, it's a lot. I think just the fact that we are such a melting pot, that we have so many different groups of people, even ideologically. I mean, I remember when the AIDS epidemic in the 80s first blew up, when it like blew up overnight. And in the beginning, it was mostly confined to people who were using drugs and people who were homosexuals. And the Christian response, the church's response, was not to be compassionate or say, let's help these people. Their response was, well, if they weren't gay, they wouldn't be getting AIDS. That's God's punishment.
Right.
You know, it's really easy once you start from a conclusion that this is mine and all I care about is myself. I don't belong to this larger community. It makes it so much easier to justify not helping someone else.
And that's the sad part about where we are in this country. Republicans, once again, do an excellent job of messaging and being consistent and lockstep in that messaging. And unfortunately, people are so easily ready to receive a message that allows them to feel superior. When you hear, because a lot of that language now is very, very coded. Americans. That means hardworking white people. So
right.
The only group that gets that delineation is white people.
Right.
So when they say, you know, you've got hardworking Americans out here, in a lot of folks' mind, again, that a lot of that means that he's talking about me.
Right.
Them to receive that message all the more easily because it allows them to feel superior. The problem is
the real America.
Right. The real, those, you know, they say Democrats are missing out on real Americans. They don't know how to talk to real Americans.
Right.
That means white Americans.
Right.
The problem is that these policies hurt you too. And then you know.
Right.
So again, 22 million people being kicked off, that's 17 million white people. They just happen to be poor, so they're expendable.
Correct.
And that's what they're
politically expendable.
Exactly. So, but no, literally. Again, they don't care if these people live or die.
No, and I'm making the distinction between politically expendable because I would agree with you that in the larger sense that yes, they are perceived to be expendable. But if Republicans felt like all 22 million people that potentially could lose their health care, that 100%, if 75% of them were going to show up in 2018 and vote Democratic, they would reevaluate what they're doing. That's what I mean by politically expendable. The people most adversely impacted by their proposals are not necessarily individuals who vote in large numbers and in large blocks. So and for the most part, much to the dismay and the confusion of the political establishment, at least on the left, poor white people Republican, and that's against their self-interest.
Right. So here's the question then. What should the Democratic message be going into 2018?
Democratic message going into 2018 has got to be, and it has to be, and I've said this for several years. I wish that President Obama would have led with this as opposed to the ACA. But the message, the Democratic message, has got to be about bottom line. We have got to find a way to create an industry or revitalize an industry or invest money into an industry so that people can become employed and can earn a livable wage to take care of themselves and their families. That's the bottom line. Now, maybe that's nostalgia of a time in America that is long gone and will never return. There was once upon a time where if you were an 8th grade dropout, you could go to your local warehouse, or you could go to your local tool and die shop, or you could go down the street and you could get a job with an 8th grade education. Or I remember we did that show at WCPT and we had that call in, and the guy was like in his 70s and he was saying that he had like a 6th grade education or something. It was something really jaw dropping when he said it. he had a blue collar job and
union job.
Union job, right? I remember, yeah. And he was able to take care of himself and his family, and his wife was a stay-at-home mom, and had a house and 2 cars and a vacation every year. Blah blah blah. Maybe that time is gone and never to return, because it's more about automation, I think, today than it is about anything else. But the Democrats, that's really the only saving grace that they have, because there is seemingly an money on the right to destroy.
But see, here's the thing.
So we can't win on the healthcare argument.
Well, here's the thing, Dave. When I hear you say that, the Obama administration presidency created millions of jobs.
Correct.
It took us out of the worst. We were hemorrhaging 750,000 jobs a month.
Correct.
Under George Bush. The proof has already been in the pudding.
Correct.
When you look at the past 30 years, the most productive times have been under Democratic presidents, be it under President Barack Obama, be it under Bill Clinton. There's no comparison between Republican and Democratic administrations when it comes to the economy and jobs. So is it a matter of producing the jobs or just getting better messaging?
I think we've got. I think that the Democratic Party has to do a better job. Certainly that under the Obama administration, we had the longest sustained job growth, I think, of any president in history, I believe.
That is correct.
But again, the messaging is definitely an issue. But at the end of the day, the messaging, you can only have a message if you can only message once you have the issue. Democrats are, I'm sorry to say, the Democratic Party is feckless and spineless, and they will shrink from confrontation at the very first sign of trouble. Republicans, like we just said earlier, Republicans will stand in lockstep behind a message that is demonstrably false, demonstrably immoral or amoral. They will take a stand just based solely on party. Democrats, because we're just left-brained and we're a wider coalition. There are more opinions and points of view and lifestyles and ideologies that you have to accommodate in our end of the political spectrum. Again, I don't think it's the message as much as it is the issue that we have to claim. Like Democrats are afraid to claim patriotism, afraid to claim morality.
All right, so here's what I think, Dave. Here's what I think the Democratic Party needs to do. The Democratic Party needs to, I agree with you, in so much as they need to be bold in their assertions. And I think they need to be bold in the assertions of education, health, and healthcare. Those two things in particular. People have a right to healthcare. They need to be front and center. They need to be front and center on paid college, on free college, through public schools. So this whole thing through high school is not going to work. People need to be able to come out of school and not be in debt.
I agree.
And I think that the Democratic Party needs to be unapologetic in their stances in those two areas, and that's what frustrates me with them now.
I would agree. I agree with you on your premise. Here's the problem with those two issues, both with healthcare and with education. If you give free, and I say free, quote unquote, with air quotes around them, if you give free healthcare, or let's say we did a single payer or Medicare for all, and we instituted free education through a bachelor's degree. The day, the people, the same percentage of people who are resistant to the Affordable Care Act are going to be resistant to those two things, because they're going to perceive it as you're asking me to pay for someone else's education. You're asking me to pay for someone else's healthcare. You remember when we were for those of you who might not know, or for those of you who do, Atiba and I went to Proviso West High School, District 209, Proviso West, right here in Hillside, Illinois. When we were in high school through today, the village of Westchester and the village of Hillside, their number one gripe has been property taxes, because the biggest percentage of your property taxes goes to fund your local school system.
Yes.
The residents of Westchester and the residents of Hillside since the late 80s and the early 90s have been petitioning for that portion of their money to come out of their property taxes, because hey, we don't send our kids to Proviso West. We send our kids to Fenwick and St. Joe's and then IHM. We send our kids to private schools. So why should our property taxes go to fund a local school system that our children don't attend? And it's that type of thinking that is going to be the biggest impact. That's why I say lead with jobs, because if you lead with jobs, if everybody has a job, or let's just say, if we were at full employment and everybody had a 10 or 25 or 50% increase and wages weren't stagnant, when everybody is doing well, it's a little bit easier to ask them to pay an additional 5%. You can pay you'll pay an additional 3 or 4 if you just got a 50% raise. You're like, 5%, no big deal. But when you haven't had a raise in 15 years,
right,
and the cost of everything keeps going up, and someone asks for an additional 5%, that's what makes people push back and start getting into their individual groups.
Right. So let's talk about why they haven't had the raise. Once again, it's Republican policies. Certainly. And once again, Democrats do a poor job of that messaging. What I'm saying is Democrats need to get out to people and be able to explain to them and show them and illustrate to them why we have more in common, why there's more that connects us than separates us.
Sure.
We just talked about Missouri going from $10 an hour to $70 an hour. Black people, that hurts everybody. So again, it's much easier for Republicans to get their message of separation to people because they pass policies that keep them poor. And in a lot of those folks' minds, they're poor because it's somebody else's fault. It's that illegal immigrant from Mexico's fault. It is that terrorist Muslim's fault. It is that lazy black's fault. And once again, I think we're agreeing on the substance of the same thing. I'm just saying that the Democrats need to be better in their messaging in those areas, because if we can't convince, like, again, these are things that are not up for discussion anymore. We can't argue about tax cuts being the way to prosperity, because all we have to do is look at Kansas. All we have to do is look at Louisiana and see that doesn't work. We can't talk about the raising the public wage, raising the minimum wage being an issue or a problem hard on the economy, because we know that's a lie. Because all we have to do is point to Seattle. All we have to do is point to Minnesota. We have enough things in place to show that our policies work and that theirs don't. The problem is we're not out there with a strong message to show people.
I would agree with you, except for the X variable in this conversation. And the X variable is what I kind of alluded to earlier. You can sit every racist, every far right-wing Christian fundamentalist, every person who believes in trickle-down economics, you can sit down and show them all the facts all day long. But at the end of the day, they don't care. There are some people on the far right wing that they don't care. D.L. Hughley, he has a radio show, and he said he gave this excellent example, and it's actually a biblical example. He gave the story about how in the Old Testament that two women had a baby, and they were roommates, and they went to bed one night, and one mother rolled over on her baby, and the baby died in its sleep. Woke up and saw that her baby was dead. She switched her dead baby for the other woman's live baby. And when the other woman woke up and saw the baby dead, she said, "No, this isn't my baby. This is your baby." So they went to King Solomon to solve it. And the one woman said, "Hey, I fell asleep. This woman fell asleep on her baby and killed it, and then she switched him, and she's trying to take my baby." And the other woman said, "No, she did it." And King Solomon said, "Well, here's what we'll do. Since we don't know who's telling the truth, we're going to cut the baby in half. And the woman who the baby actually belonged to loved the baby so much that she said, you know what? Nope, don't kill the baby. Just let her have it. And the other woman said, because she was so hurt and so pained that her baby was dead, the other woman was like, yeah, cut the baby in half and give us each a half. And Solomon was able to tell from that whose baby that the woman really belonged to. In this analogy, the baby is the United States.
Right.
And the woman who said, kill the baby, I don't care, cut the baby in half, those are the people on the far right. They don't care.
Right.
They don't care about, all they care about is getting the United States back to what it used to be. All white men, all not letting foreigners come in here, not letting African. I mean, they want to get back to what they perceive to be a pure a nostalgic view of America, and they don't care about cutting the baby in half. You can't reason with people like that.
And you're right. There is a certain percentage of the population, and these are people that probably still support Trump to this day, that have that view. But I do believe that because if what you're saying is wholly true, then there's no point.
I think that we're gonna have a good example of this in our next segment. But we have to be patient enough in order to get to where we want to go. We're gonna have to come to the realization that we're gonna have to let a generation of people who think a certain way and who are not going to change. We have to let those people die out, so that we can get closer to a consensus with rational people. There are enough people out there who long for the days of old, that are not going to let it go, going to compromise. And unfortunately, a lot of those people are in positions of power.
And those people will never die out. And let me tell you why, very quickly, because we do need to move on. When you look at the things that are being done in our educational system, they are educating and raising these people to have these views now, especially in the South. I just read an article today about a school system in Alabama that has Laura Ingraham as required reading. This is what they do. We have books that call slaves immigrant workers.
Right.
The things that they are doing, particularly in southern states, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, particularly in those states. Again, it is part of our educational system for these people to come up and have this false patriotism, because that's really what it boils down to, is this false patriotism about the contributions of many white people and the complete omission of the contributions of this country by other people, be it African Americans, be it Muslims, be it homosexuals, the gay, the LGBT community. Right. You get all those things are omitted. So these people are coming up. That's why you're seeing these 12-year-olds and 15 and 18-year-olds with these strange views, because you're thinking the racists are going to die, because they figured out now that they can actually control the educational system, and these people come up with these ideas through education. I don't know that we've been waiting on these people to die out for 300 years, and it hasn't happened yet.
Well, there's definitely a resurgence that is of conservative ideology that has been bolstered by revisionist history.
Right, and we haven't even talked about how they're trying to, again, put the Bible back into schools.
Right.
And again, we're both Christians. But again, that's not a place for public school. I want my child to go to school to learn math, to learn science, and to learn how to read and write. We can go to church on Sunday, and that we can do that at home.
But again, I would attribute that to the fecklessness that the Democrats have been so afraid to be painted anti-religion,
right,
that they haven't taken a firm stance on the clause in the Constitution that says there will not be an establishment of religion. I mean, you can be pro-life. Again, that's another messaging thing. You can be pro-life and still think that a woman has a right to choose.
Not mutually exclusive.
Right. That does, because you think that a woman has a right to choose does not mean that you are pro-abortion. You can be pro-life and still say that it's up. So again, we definitely need to do a better job of messaging on the left, but we need to pick out one or two. The Republicans, their messaging, the reason why they're good at their messaging is because you can boil down the entire Republican platform to like 2 or 3 issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just about pro-gun. It's about pro-gun, it's lower taxes, smaller government, and anti-abortion. Really, those are really the 3 issues of the Republican Party. Now it has morphed into or has included now, they're still trying to deal with the gay rights and gay marriage, but that's a really recent phenomenon. Going back to the 80s, their 3 issues have been smaller government, lower taxes, pro-life. Democrats, we trying to handle racial equality and economics and gerrymandering and climate change and global warming, and Democrats are trying to handle so many different issues, and really human beings we're not even wired that way. We down to if the Democrats could claim one issue to base their entire policy and platform on, it should be around economics for middle class and poor people, because rich people are going to be rich regardless.
Right. We're going to have to leave it there, Dave. We're going to take a quick break. We thank you so much for listening to Humanity in the Headlines. When we come back, are you responsible to marry within your race? We'll be right back. We are back on Humanity in the Headlines. So we don't have a lot of time left, so we got to hop right into this, Dave. This week, Dr. Umar Johnson made some very interesting remarks. He criticized Serena Williams and her new marriage to her white companion. I don't know his name, but she's now pregnant by this man, and hey, I say kudos to her. But before I even talk about my opinion, let me just tell the audience what he said. His contention was that Serena Williams should not have married this man because he's white, and that this white man has married Serena because of her wealth and her fame. And his point was that if she was not Serena Williams, one of the best tennis players in the world, as famous as she was, that this man would not be after her, would not date her, would not be with her. He also suggested that this is an attack on her wealth, and that at some point, because her husband is significantly less wealthy than she is, that at some point, and that he's going to walk away with a significant amount of her fortune. And that, so a lot of people have had opinions about that. Again, I'm paraphrasing. It's easy to find the sound. It's only 1 or 2 minutes long on YouTube. Just Google Umar Johnson, Serena Williams. It's the first thing that comes up in YouTube. So you can definitely hear the comments for yourself. But that's definitely a accurate paraphrasing of what he was saying.
Sure.
And to me, listening to it, it just begged the question: does anyone have a responsibility to marry within their race? Now, he was on Roland Martin this week, and he further articulated that if you are an African American, he doesn't feel that black people in America are Americans.
Okay.
He said, if you are black and you are down for the cause, if you marry outside of your race, then he calls that a contradiction. And he says that he has a harder time respecting you if you do that. Roland Martin countered and said, well, what about Sidney Poitier? What about, what was the other actor's name? The older gentleman, I'm sorry. Harry Belafonte, thank you. They've been down for the cause and they have white wives. What do you say to them? And he's like, I respect the work that they've done. Marry white women is still a contradiction. So with those two things as our backdrop, do you have a responsibility, especially as an African American, to marry within your race? What say you?
It's interesting that we're having this conversation, and it really just shows how deeply ingrained this issue is into the human experience, but specifically the American experience. For those of you who, and again, the timing of this is so interesting because we just had the 50-year anniversary of the Loving versus Virginia decision. For those of you who don't know, years ago in the United States, it was illegal. Interracial marriage was illegal. We just had the 50th anniversary. That decision on Loving versus Virginia was decided by the Supreme Court June 12th, 1967. That was a case brought by Mildred Loving, a black woman, and Richard Loving, a white man. And when they got married, they had actually been sentenced to a year in prison. Yeah. And so again, just to get into just a quick blurb on this. The law that they were guilty of actually disobeying was the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 that prohibited the marriage of a white person and a person of color. And a person of color under that law was anyone who was non-white. And that even when you go into the now for the 1924 Racial Integrity Act, it was based on something called eugenics. And eugenics is when the science of improving a group of people or a group of humans through controlled breeding. And so you're trying to get a desired outcome. So when you start talking about like the history of the perception of interracial marriage, it really gets into some deeply founded, deeply rooted prejudices about people feeling that they have a right to maintain their racial identity and their racial integrity. That's a deeply held belief. And even the practice of eugenics, I find it ironic that it was embraced while it was a discussion about white and black in this country. It really wasn't rejected until World War II, and the Nazis were using the practice of eugenics against the Jews. For us to keep in the context of this conversation, because once you start talking about interracial marriage and you start talking about that you shouldn't do it or it's wrong to do it, you start touching on some really sensitive historic subjects in our past and our recent past as a species that have taken a really dark turn.
Address the good doctor's comments specifically about Serena first, and then we'll come back to that. Here's my issue. I think that it was the wrong time to criticize Serena Williams in his evaluation, and I'll tell you why. Serena Williams is 36 years old. She has 3 to 4 childbearing years left. She is the best tennis player, arguably, of all time. She is also the most recognizable female athlete, not in the United States, but in the world. She is a millionaire many times over. She has absolutely no scandal to her name. She has kept herself from becoming a baby mama.
Right.
She has no children out of wedlock.
Right.
At 35 years old, 36 years old. Right. That's no small feat. So she is, my point in saying all of that is, she is but ideal. And it's not as if she hasn't dated a lot of black men, because she has. Common comes to mind. Drake comes to mind. Keyshawn Johnson comes to mind, just literally off the top of my head. None of them thought enough of her to put a ring on it, so to speak. So when I listen to his criticism about this white guy who's to ask her to marry him, for whatever his reasons may be, he did it.
Right.
And black men had an opportunity to wife this woman, to lift this queen up, and for whatever the reason, they decided not to. Now, I've heard criticisms of Serena Williams, through pop culture, of she stinks. People talk about she's manly. She looks like a man. She blah, blah, blah. So whatever these criticisms were, this man thought enough of her to say, will you marry me? And she said yes. No one's even talking about Venus, second best tennis player in the world. She lost today. Sorry about that, but she made it to Wimbledon finals 2 years in a row. She lost just to her sister last year.
Right.
She's 37 years old. She's still single. She's still childless. And nobody's even checking for Venus, who's worth $75 million. Why? She's 6 foot. If she was white with that same body, all you would hear about is how she has legs for days.
Right. Right. Right.
Right. So we got two sisters who are without scandal, both of which are well over worth $100 million combined, both of which have only been associated with winning, both of which are beautiful, and black men can't be bothered. I'm sorry. I can't accept his criticism of her today.
What I will say is this. Life is short. You and I are in our early 40s, and it amazes me, when I think back on our lives and all the things that we've done, but life is short. And if you are lucky enough, someone who loves you and who wants to be with you and who wants to marry you and who wants to spend their life with you, that's more important than the melanin in their skin.
And I would agree with you. Because I mean, that's the other thing. I don't care who people marry. I do find it odd that people who are really, really down for black causes, in particular men down for black causes, have white wives like that.
That's
really
strange to me. That's really easy to explain. And I would say this to anybody who has a criticism of an accomplished, rich, famous African American who marries outside of their race. The biggest variable that determines who you are going to marry is proximity.
I agree with that.
If you cannot, you are going to select the person that you date, by extension who you marry. You're going to select that person based on the people that you come into contact with the most. And so really the larger question becomes, if we have all of these very successful, famous, rich African American men, what's going on that when they get to that echelon that they see white women than black women?
Yeah, see, we're running out of time.
But again, it's all about proximity. If you are going to choose from the people that you are around.
Yes, and I agree with you to some extent. So, would like to support your claim. Is it a big surprise to me that Tiger Woods exclusively dates white women?
That's my point.
No, not at all.
That's my point, because if you look at
world,
right, if you look at a golf game, if you watch a golf game on television, there are not a lot of sisters standing on the side.
Right, and that's Tiger Woods. What about all these NBA players and NFL players?
Well, again, I would say it's about proximity, and just because you're it is safe to say that the higher up that you go, is the more money that you make or the more money that you have, the fewer. Is that a fair statement?
That's generally a fair statement.
Right. So the fact that you're in the NBA or the NFL, that fact does not melt into the background because you're playing basketball or you're playing football. After the game, after parties, and when you're socializing and when you're talking to people about endorsement deals and blah blah blah, when you're in that end of the pool, there are going to be fewer African Americans there because those people tend to have more affluence and have more money. That's just a function of the reality of the situation. Now, you can argue about whether or not somebody who makes it, should they go back to their roots to find, the girl he dated in high school or whatever, his high school sweetheart. You can have that conversation, but I think that's a separate conversation. At the end of the day, the further up the ladder you move, the fewer of us are there. And like I said, it's about proximity. If there are 10 women that like you or that are feeling you and you want to get married, and 9 of those 10 women are white, then statistically the probability is high that you're going to wind up with a white spouse.
Yeah. We're going to have to save this for another day. I have a lot of thoughts about that, but we can't get into it. We have time is always against us. So
Facebook, if I'm crazy, go ahead and post this and share this. We want to go ahead and get some conversation, some buzz going about this, so we can revisit it.
Interracial couples out there, with you, and to ultimately answer the question, I don't think individuals have a individual responsibility to marry in their race. I don't think there's a wrong answer to that. If you want to marry within your race, I can understand that. If you want to marry someone outside your race, I can understand that. I don't have a problem with it either way.
I would quantify that by taking it one step further. If you accept the mantle of the preservation and the purity of your race, then you should marry inside your race. But you can only do that. You should only do that if you're going to accept that responsibility. If you personally say, I need to do something to preserve my race, then you should go marry someone of the same race.
There it is, folks. Let us know what you're thinking on Facebook. We'd love to comment later. We'd love to keep this conversation going. Share this video, please, with as many people as you can. And we thank you so much for listening to Humanity in the Headlines. We'll be back the same time next week. Don't forget the Proviso West All-Class Picnic tomorrow. And again, I thank Breon Jones and, of course, Mr. Earl Winfrey for our platform. We will see you next week on Humanity in the Headlines.